On my 69th birthday, my son texted me, "We need space from you. Please don't reach out anymore at all." And his wife even liked the message. That text cost them their $30 million inheritance. I sat in my leather armchair in the sprawling Connecticut home I'd built from nothing, staring at those 2 sentences on my phone screen. The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway, the only sound in a house that had grown too quiet since my wife Anna passed. I'd spent the entire day waiting for a call, a text, anything to acknowledge that I still existed in their world. Instead, I got a corporate-style dismissal, not from a business partner or employee, but from my own son Leo. And there, beneath his message, was a small red heart icon with 2 words that made my blood run cold. Chloe liked this message. His wife hadn't just agreed with cutting me off, she'd celebrated it. The memories I'd pushed aside for years came flooding back. Every excuse I'd made for them, every red flag I'd ignored, the $500,000 down payment I'd provided for their Tribeca penthouse, which they called their starter home. The constant stream of credit card bills that arrived at my address, designer boutiques, 5-star resorts, first-class flights, all quietly paid from my accounts without so much as a thank you. 6 months ago, Leo had called asking for $200,000 to fund Chloe's latest business venture, an online art gallery. He hadn't asked, he'd informed me. When I gently suggested he might use some of his own capital, he'd laughed. "Dad, this is my capital. It's the family money." I'd built my architectural hardware empire from a dusty workshop into a national brand worth $50 million. After Anna died, I'd poured everything into Leo, believing that providing for him was my final promise to her. I'd given him everything: cars, credit cards, a monthly allowance of $30,000, full access to the family trust. Everything except a reason to respect the man who'd provided it. Looking at that text message, I realized my mistake. I hadn't given Leo a foundation to build on. I'd given him a fully furnished penthouse, and now he was complaining about the landlord. But what Leo and Chloe didn't understand was that the man they'd just dismissed had spent 30 years learning exactly how power works. And unlike them, I'd never forgotten who actually held it. I walked to my study and pulled out a thick file folder, my insurance policy. Inside were copies of every financial document, every trust agreement, every legal structure I'd built to protect and transfer my wealth. What my son had never bothered to understand was that everything he enjoyed, the penthouse, the cars, the credit cards, even his checking account, flowed through the Thorne family revocable trust. The key word being revocable. I'd structured it that way on purpose, with my attorney David Sterling's guidance. As the grantor and sole trustee, I maintained absolute control. Leo and Chloe were beneficiaries, not owners. They lived in my penthouse, drove my cars, spent my money. They'd never actually owned any of it. I picked up my phone and opened Leo's contact. My finger hovered over his name for a moment. Then I scrolled down and pressed block this caller. The confirmation appeared, contact blocked. I did the same for Chloe. The digital silence was now complete, and it was on my terms. Then I made a call that would change everything. David Sterling. "David, it's Elias. Sorry to call so late, but we need to meet first thing tomorrow morning. It's time to make some significant adjustments to the trust." There was a pause. David had been my lawyer for 30 years. He understood the weight behind my calm tone. "I'll clear my schedule. Everything all right?" "Everything is perfectly clear," I replied. "We're turning off the supply." The next morning, I sat across from David in his glass tower office overlooking Long Island Sound. Between us lay the original trust documents, each page representing years of careful planning that Leo had taken for granted. I explained the previous night's events with the detached precision of a business report. The birthday silence, my simple text expressing love, Leo's brutal response, Chloe's digital applause. David leaned back in his chair. "I've been waiting for this call for 5 years, Elias. Ever since Leo's 30th birthday party at the yacht club. Remember his toast? He thanked you for providing the seed capital for his life, like he was a startup and you were just an early investor. That's when I knew he doesn't see you as a father anymore. He sees you as a bank." Hearing my fears articulated so clearly was both painful and validating. This wasn't the reaction of a bitter old man. This was reality, visible to others long before I'd accepted it. David opened the trust file. Everything of significance flows through here. The penthouse deed, held by the trust, vehicle leases, trust's name, credit lines, guaranteed by trust assets, the monthly $30,000 allowance, direct disbursement. You hold the only key, Elias. You can change any provision at any time, for any reason. I met his gaze without hesitation. Then, let's start the process. I want them removed completely. Terminate the penthouse lease. Cancel every credit line. Stop the monthly payments, effective immediately. Everything. While I was restructuring their entire world, Leo and Chloe were performing their usual routine, oblivious to the earthquake I'd just triggered. I could picture them at Per Se, their natural habitat, a restaurant where a single meal cost more than most people's rent. Chloe would be photographing her truffle-dusted risotto for Instagram, while Leo pontificated about wine pairings, playing the role of wealthy sophisticates they'd never actually earned. When the leather-bound bill arrived, Leo would have casually handed over his American Express black card, the titanium one he called his heavy metal, without even glancing at the four-figure total. Why would he? The money wasn't real to him. It was just a river flowing from a distant mountain he'd never had to climb. A few minutes later, the waiter returned, apologetic but firm. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Thorne, but the card has been declined." Leo's first reaction would have been incredulous laughter. "Declined? That's impossible. Run it again." But the universe had just changed its operating procedures. His second card failed, then Chloe's. Each decline building panic as they realized this wasn't a technical error, it was systematic. That's when Leo would have tried calling me, but his phone would connect instantly to the dead silence of a blocked number. The text that followed would bounce back with "message failed to send" in damning red letters. "He blocked me," Leo would whisper, the reality hitting him like ice water. My own father blocked my number. The question hanging between them: how do you pay for a $400 lunch when your entire financial existence has just been erased? Over the following days, I maintained perfect silence while their world disintegrated piece by piece. Each automatic payment failure, each declined transaction, each suspended service was a lesson in consequences they'd never been taught. Their cleaning service canceled for non-payment. Leo's exclusive gym denied his key fob access. The curated meal delivery service stopped appearing at their door. Every invisible pillar supporting their effortless lifestyle crumbled systematically. They tried reaching me through borrowed phones, unknown numbers, desperate voicemails that I listened to with clinical detachment. The progression was predictable: fury, manipulation, false concern about my health, and finally, broken desperation. "Dad, please!" came Leo's voice in a 3 a.m. message, hoarse with exhaustion. "I'm sorry. We made a terrible mistake. I'll get a real job, I swear. We'll pay you back. Just please don't do this. Don't throw us away. We're your family." My phone's call log showed 109 blocked attempts that night. 109 desperate tries to breach walls I'd built with 30 years of business experience. But the real storm was just beginning. The eviction notice arrived like a legal earthquake, $60,000 in overdue rent for their Tribeca penthouse. Leo's confusion was predictable. "Rent? What rent? You bought this for us." That's when reality crashed down. He'd never bothered to understand the structure. They'd never owned anything. As if choreographed for maximum impact, Chloe's Range Rover was repossessed the same afternoon. I could picture her standing helplessly as the tow truck lifted her status symbol. Neighbors watching from windows, the ultimate social humiliation playing out on Manhattan streets. With their backs against the wall and nowhere left to run, they made their final mistake. They decided to bring the war to my doorstep. I was tending my roses when they arrived, box cello suites flowing through my noise-canceling headphones. My security system had already alerted me, but I continued my gardening with deliberate calm. Through the iron fence, I could see them gesticulating wildly, shouting words I couldn't hear and didn't need to. This was the real confrontation, not angry voices, but a demonstration of power, my peace against their chaos, my closed garden against their collapsing world. They screamed themselves hoarse while I pruned roses, their emotional leverage finally rendered completely powerless. When security arrived and escorted them off my property as trespassers, the defeat was absolute. They drove away with nothing left, No money, no home, no hope, and no father. That night brought another wave of desperate calls, 109 more blocked attempts to breach my resolve. But I wasn't finished. There was still one final lesson to teach. A week later, David sent them a formal invitation to discuss the future of the Thorne family trust. They would see it as surrender, as proof their desperate campaign had worked. They had no idea they were simply signing their own death warrant. When they arrived at David's conference room, they looked diminished, expensive clothes hanging loose, faces hollow with stress. Leo delivered a rehearsed apology filled with excuses and empty promises. When he finished, I pushed a leather-bound document across the mahogany table. "This is the amended and restated Thorne Family Revocable Trust," I said calmly. "It will answer all your questions about the future." As they frantically searched the pages, I guided them to the truth. Page 12, Section 3, Primary Beneficiaries. You'll find it has been simplified. Their names were gone, completely erased. The monthly allowance provision has been deleted entirely. There are no longer any financial provisions for either of you in this document. Chloe's whispered question captured their entire worldview. So where does the money go? I turned to page 15. The entirety of the trust's assets, $32 million, will establish the Thorne Next Generation Scholarship, full-ride educational endowments for deserving students pursuing business, and industrial design degrees at Connecticut State University. David added the final details with legal precision. Students from low-income backgrounds, demonstrated merit, the university Leo had dropped out of after I'd paid for 2 years. "That's the school you quit, Leo," I said, my voice level. "After I paid for everything, I thought it was time someone actually graduated from there with a Thorne family investment." The irony was perfect and permanent. Leo's greatest failure had become my greatest success, legally binding and utterly irreversible. 6 months later, I stood at a podium in that same university's auditorium, addressing the first recipients of the Thorne Next Generation Scholarship. Bright, determined students who understood the value of opportunity because they'd never been handed anything. "A legacy," I told them, "is not what you leave for people, it's what you leave inside of them." Meanwhile, across the state, Leo was learning the dignity of real work. I'd heard through discreet channels that he'd found employment as a logistics coordinator, loading dock clipboard in hand, finally understanding responsibility. Chloe managed a boutique clothing store, folding sweaters for hourly wages, their social media empire a distant memory. Their life was no longer beautiful or easy. It was difficult, challenging, and for the first time, theirs. That evening, as I sat in my garden watching the sunset, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number containing just one word. "Dad." No desperation, no demands. Just a question, the first step across the canyon of silence they had created. I smiled and placed the phone face down. I didn't need to answer immediately. The power to respond, to shape the future, was entirely mine. For the first time in years, the silence felt like a beginning. They had asked for space, and I'd given it to them. The space to fail, to learn, to finally stand on their own. In losing their inheritance, they'd gained the chance to earn their own lives, and perhaps, someday, I might get my son back. Not as a dependent, but as an equal. A relationship built not on money, but on mutual respect, something no trust fund could ever buy.